things first, I'm so excited to be doing another one of these Menopause 201. I find them really interesting. Gives me a chance to do research on something I might not know the most about, and also talk to really interesting people. So let me introduce my guest tonight, Stacy. Stacy Kazinchuk is the head of our lifestyle program at Genev.com. She is a registered dietitian nutritionist and an exercise physiologist, and just sort of is the yin to my yang when it comes to taking care of patients. And really, we love working together. We love talking about things like this. So, Stacy, you want to tell us a little bit about your background?
Absolutely. Thank you, Rebecca. Yes, I love the yin to yang. It is such a fun collaboration, and I enjoy being able to be a part of some of these Meno 201 episodes because the care model that Rebecca, I definitely credit Rebecca for, of bringing dietitian and OBGYN together is such a wonderful collaboration. And I think tonight what we're going to be talking about is that opportunity to do that. So my background, as Rebecca mentioned, I'm a registered dietitian, exercise physiologist. I have worked in college athletics, academia, the precision health and wellness arena, and now taking all of that and putting it into women's health. I'll say that I bring the lens of exercise physiology and sports nutrition, I think, to even the work with that we do with women in this period postmenopause state, looking at it from how do we help people perform their best in life. And some of that can be even just helping them to feel better with their digestion, which we will talk about today.
Yes, very good. So, some other sort of housekeeping type notes. First of all, I am a gynecologist. We're going to be talking a lot about the gut today. I'm not a gastroenterologist, but this comes from a lot of sort of research that we've done together to really help women to understand how digestion can change through this transition and with some of the things we do. Um, and, we're not going to deep dive into the genetics of things because that's just not what I think this is for. It's more about talking through, how do we understand what's going on in the gut and how do we best support our patients. And then second housekeeping thing, at the end, I'm going to ask you guys, please put any ideas for future Menopause 201 that you have into the chat. We've sort of come to the end of another year of it, and I really want to see if there's something we're missing or you guys want to hear more about. So, and during the whole presentation, please put any questions into the chat that you have. We'll sort of pick them up as we go along and or grab them at the end, but we'll definitely leave time for Q&A. So, tonight's Menopause 201 is really about gut health and menopause. And I think the best place to start is to talk about sort of what is the microbiome we're talking about and what do we know about it in menopause. So I think we would all recognize that the gut biome influences a lot of our body's processes and that there is influence on estrogen metabolism, inflammation, and the effects of inflammation, including chronic disease. And it's also increasingly being linked to obesity, the gut microbiome, and metabolic health. And so, is that a cause or effect of midlife weight gain? Well, that's somewhat up for debate. It's composed of trillions and trillions of microorganisms, bacteria, viruses, fungi, microbes that live throughout the gastrointestinal tract. And these microbes play a really crucial role in digestion, metabolism, immune function, the barrier, intestinal barrier, and they signal with our bodies and sort of function as another organ. You know, relatively speaking, research into the gut microbiome's pretty new. Really, we only started DNA sequencing the bacteria there in the 90s, and the NIH's Human Microbiome Project started to take off in 2007. And it's hard research to do, right, Stacy?
Sorry, I had to come off mute there.
That's
Yeah,
okay.
if we think if we think about it, one of the things, as you may imagine, as a dietitian, we do talk about digestion a lot, and I always think it's funny that sometimes patients are like, "I'm sorry, I have to tell you about, my bowel movements," and I'm like, "Ah, That's part of it. If what's going in isn't coming out, we have bigger problems. But I think that that shows there's hesitation around talking about poop. So if you can imagine trying to recruit people to then collect their poop and send it in and to be able to do all this. So at the very logistical level, poop research is hard. And then the methods are improving, but as Rebecca mentioned, it's relatively new in terms of the research that's being done. So it's continuing to improve, but it's not at the sophistication that it will be probably as the years go on. And so thinking about all of those things, it can be more challenging compared to some other research, and that factors into the data that we have to make specific recommendations. So as Rebecca mentioned, we're going to talk about what is known, and then how we're applying that collaboratively with the patients we see. I think it is also important to recognize that everything from the air we breathe, the food we eat, how we move, sleep, stress, they all can impact our gut microbiome. So it also makes it hard to conduct studies that control all of those things. And it's helpful to recognize that all of those things can be factors. So, with all of that being said, the microbiome research then in menopause, as we may imagine, is even more sparse.
Mm-hmm.
If we look at, women's health research is less, and then in an area that is relatively new, it's going to also be a lot less. So when we look at what is out there, most of it comes from case-controlled studies, very small numbers, populations that are more homogenous, so maybe done in Spain or in China, where we obviously know the food is different, the soil is different, the air is different. And so then when we try to translate that to, say, an American population, it's not going to be a direct correlation there or a direct translation. And so the other part is there's conflicting results. So some of these studies show that there have been benefits, some show there hasn't, and then there's a lot that may have to do just with the features of that specific population that's within the study. So we're going to go into what are the general points that we can talk about and how can you use these even in your practice, and how to help patients orient around the important parts of digestion that we do know to be supported by evidence based.
Mm-hmm.
So what I think sometimes what the microbiome research, when I think about it from a nutrition, exercise, physiology standpoint, I get excited about it. And I think any of us, if you're excited about science, it tells us that perhaps maybe this is what reinforces a lot of things we already know. And perhaps it's the microbiome that's facilitating some of the action of these habits to happen. So I'm going to talk about some basics right now of some things that we know to be beneficial, and then we're going to elaborate throughout the discussion tonight to talk a little bit more. But some of the things that we do know that research supports, and I would say the top thing that comes to mind in the microbiome research that you consistently see is the importance of diversity. Diversity in the gut bacteria consistently shows better health outcomes when there's diversity within the bacteria that make up the gut microbiome. I like to think of this as a rainforest. We know that rainforests do better when there's a diversity of species, of plants, of animals. They're going to be thriving. You take away that diversity, and you're not going to have as much of a thriving rainforest. And so, if we take that thought process and we think about it, what provides that diversity, well, diversity of plants that we're eating can help with that. Diversity of different types of movement, looking at different mindfulness strategies can actually be helpful. Fiber, we know fiber is beneficial. This is where that can come into play. And when it comes to taking things away, having less sugar and less saturated fat consistently shows more diversity in the bacteria in the gut. So nothing super sexy here or new and novel, but I think there's something to be said for the basics and how we can support our patients in implementing these and recognizing that these basics have an impact on the gut microbiome, and that can help other things that they are focused on, whether it be metabolic health, in terms of their menopause transition, weight concerns, or even just the overall digestion.
I think sometimes you said something really important. Nothing super
Yeah,
sexy or new,
I know.
but sometimes it helps. when we have multiple things to talk about with a patient that are all supporting the same behavior change, right?
Hmm.
If we
Hmm.
can say, not only are we thinking about your weight or where you're distributing your weight or your body composition, but let's also think about your gut microbiome and how that's
Hmm.
influencing your long-term health and inflammation in your body, and just gives us more tools that we can work with patients with.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's the piece of helping patients to
Mhm.
understand that, sometimes they get so narrow focused on, well, I just want to lose weight. So, and we say increase fiber. Well, that increase in
Mhm.
fiber may help you lose weight for various reasons, but it also may support your whole entire system through the microbiome by
Right,
benefiting that microbiome and that bacteria there.
exactly. And you said a lot about diversity, and we should really recognize that that's a very polymicrobial space, right? There are tons of bacteria, fungi, viruses, all those things in there. But there are a couple of sort of big phyla of bacteria that we really need to think about in the gut, and that are the things we tend to research the most. And those two phyla, and any gastroenterologist out there, I am so sorry if I murder these names because I don't talk about them that much, but are Bacteroides and Firmicutes, or Firmicutes, or Firmicutes. I don't even know how to say that one. Um, and within these big phyla, there are many species in the families. And one of the things that we have seen starting to creep out in the menopause research in this space is that disruptions in estrogen can disrupt the ratio of these. It's not that you lose one bacterial phyla or, a whole group of bacteria. It's that, the subtle balance of these bacteria within the gut is really, really important to how we process our estrogen. You know, the studies, there's a little bit of conflict in the studies. Most of the studies show that there's sort of a slight increase in sort of the Firmicutes phyla and decrease in the Bacteroides phyla in menopause or with disruptions in estrogen. There are some conflict with some of the Chinese studies which don't show that. However, there's some theory that these populations were very low BMI as compared to everybody else, so that may also be interacting or a confounder in the studies and how they come out. Um, Within those phyla, there are very particular bacteria that have been looked at as increasing with the loss of estrogen and others that decrease with the loss of estrogen. And it's important because the ones that seem to be increasing can be slightly more pro-inflammatory in the general system. And the other thing that people have looked at is Eubacterium, which is a family that's sort of associated with isoflavones and the processing of isoflavones. And they found that women who seem to maintain higher levels of these bacteria seem to have less dysbiosis in menopause. So, can you talk a little bit, Stacey, about what isoflavones are, what foods contain them, why these might be important in this transition?
Yeah, I love how you bring this up because I think this is something, and this could be information, kind of fun facts you can bring to your patients because for so long, so let's start with isoflavones
Mhm.
they're usually referred to soy isoflavones, or they're a class
Mhm.
of phytoestrogens. So they're polyphenic compounds from plants chemicals that have both estrogen agonist and antagonistic properties. And for so long, many women, especially those that had breast cancer, were told not to eat any soy containing foods. And then I think the public took that as don't eat soy, like eating soy causes breast cancer. Like things went to great extremes.
Mhm.
And what more research has shown is that these effects actually may be beneficial and may even have cardioprotective factors, which we know are what women are at greatest risk for of dying in terms of heart disease. And so we have to think about, plants, hopefully we can all agree on this call that the estrogenic properties in plants is not the same as the exact estrogenic properties in our bodies or in a
Mhm.
hormone therapy, that they have similar things, but they're not chemically the exact same. And so I think it's important for us to help our patients to understand that. And when we're
Mhm.
thinking about foods, different legumes, especially soybeans, soy related products, have the richest source. Now, one thing I will say on those soy products, you do want the least processed form of soy. So edamame, tofu, tempeh, less of the, soy additives as preservatives or things to process foods. And we'll talk a little bit about those ultra processed foods that are getting a little more attention. But in their plant-based form, soy foods can have benefits. And it's interesting that what I think this research that Rebecca talked about is perhaps it's through the microbiome that this benefit is happening. Again, still more to learn,
Oh,
but
so
looking
much
at that
more.
mechanism, yeah, it was pretty cool to see.
Mm-hmm.
So, Rebecca, that brings me to wondering
Mm-hmm.
what about the gut microbiome can it impact estrogen levels? Do we know what's happening with that
Yeah.
interaction?
I think we're learning what's happening. I don't think we know what's happening. We do know that at least the limited data that we have in premenopausal women is there really isn't much correlation between estrogen levels and the gut biome. So, but there seems to be more correlation maybe in postmenopause. And what they're seeing is that the estrogen that we see most prevalent in those not taking hormone therapy, so estrone, E1, seems to be, have an influence on the ratios of these bacteria. So some of that change in the balance of the bacteria in the gut may have something to do with estrone. And there's also some data that links that change in balance and possibly driven by estrone to BMI. Now, we know fat cells make estrone. Is this a cause? Is this an effect? That's where the data sort of lets us down at this point. We've got some associations starting to establish, but we really don't have sort of how this is all working. Um, the two phyla of bacteria that I mentioned before, both are bacteria that make beta glucuronidase. And beta glucuronidase is a really important enzyme. It breaks down a lot of things, but it specifically helps to break down and reabsorb estrogen byproducts in the gut. And so, and intestinal cells can do this a little, but it's really the bacteria that are doing this for us. So, what's really important is that, it's helping us to recirculate what estrogen we have if you have the right balance of these bacteria in the gut. There's also some evidence that when these bacteria are in the right balance and recirculating estrogen, they're also breaking down a lot of toxins. And so downside of that is, if you have too much beta glucuronidase, we see that in patients who get colon cancer, is that they have much higher levels of this enzyme. So are they breaking down and reabsorbing more toxins? And again, it's that balance. The ratio is off, and the bacteria that break down those toxins are maybe predominant. Um, I think that the other thing that we see is that that balance is altered in people who eat a primarily Western diet. Now, how you define that exactly depends on the study, but there are certain things that Stacy's already mentioned in terms of sugar and saturated fats that can drive up that imbalance of the bacteria, more beta glucuronidase, and more risk for colon cancer, which we sort of already know through associative studies. But now we're starting to get some research into the actual deeper possible reasons for all of that. Um, in terms of hormone therapy and how this all figures in, that's a great question. And really not a lot of data on how it affects the microbiome. We do know, and Stacy, you can confirm this, we have patients all the time that come to us and say they definitely have changes in digestion as they go through the menopausal transition and may have changes in digestion with hormone therapy as well, or even birth control pills. And how much of that is actually attributable to gut microbiome versus how much of that is attributable to side effects of hormones is really hard to suss out. I mean, we all know that progesterone definitely has an impact on digestion, has an impact on sphincters and gut motility. So some of that may just be a straight up hormone response. Some of it may be impacts on gut microbiome. I don't think we've studied this to this point. But certainly something that if someone comes to you with those symptoms is something to take seriously. Luckily, usually settles itself out in a couple of months. As with all things, things come to a steady state and get better. But, it just sort of hints at how all these things are very interrelated. So, Stacey, I mentioned the Western diet. I started down that pathway. I'm going to
Mm,
toss it over to you. What are the
yeah.
features in the Western diet that are important that we're really seeing are impactful, both from a gut biome perspective, but also from risk perspective in colon cancer, even?
Yeah, there's, I think, again, something that where it's not like, oh, this is so shocking. I think we're just now getting more data to reinforce. And perhaps,
Mhm.
unfortunately, there's a Lancet publication that came out last week talking about the significance that really
Mhm.
started looking at large body of evidence coming out and did a review of all that to kind of say, okay, we knew that there was indicators indicating that these ultra processed foods, and these are things that take ingredients. And I will say, the literature does not define ultra processed foods all the same way, so that
No.
is a limitation. But I think if we think about whole food products, I'm going to use corn because that's one of the easiest ones to do. And so, corn on the cob is not obviously an ultra processed food, but when you process that corn into ingredients that are then added to other foods, then those foods are often the ultra processed ones that are being added to. And so the processing and the ingredients that are added, primarily these tend to have higher amounts of sugar, higher amounts of saturated fat, higher amounts of sodium, and various amount of other ingredients that make them more palatable. So people want more of them. We could do a whole other discussion on the cost factors and the populations targeted with these foods for another day. But if we look at the data as a whole on that, we are seeing greater risk of chronic disease, association with a greater risk of chronic disease. And so certainly that could be facilitated by the action happening at the microbiome, likely also other things systemically. And so as we think about improving overall digestion and gut microbiome health, certainly at the very basic level, helping patients to decrease these. They may not be able to eliminate them, but decreasing the amount of ultra processed foods would definitely be a great thing to offer to them.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's
It's
a
hard. I mean, there's definitely a equity issues
mhm,
in the
yeah.
in the access to food that we don't have time for tonight, but we should that need to be on the table, and it definitely puts different populations at different differential risk.
Mhm, absolutely. And I'm glad that you brought up, thinking about the digestion challenges or the
Hmm.
digestion experiences of adding
Right.
in any type of hormone therapy. I have a lot of patients, as Rebecca mentioned, that mention like, oh, I just started hormone therapy. I'm feeling really bloated. And sometimes they can think like, is this going to be like this forever? I don't know if I want this. So it's helpful, I think, for us to be able to talk about, hey, this might be an experience that you're going to have. It likely won't last forever. I think a lot of patients also say this reminds me of PMS. And so I think that's a great connection of like, yeah, it's
Hmm.
probably something hormonal, and that didn't last forever either. It wasn't
Right.
comfortable, wasn't pleasurable, but the helping to reassure them that that's not the new normal with these things.
Hmm. No, that's very true.
Yeah. Anything else you could think of, Rebecca, on like as you're thinking of your patient population, ultra processed foods, Western diet, things that come up?
It's interesting because I think as we learn more and more about these foods, I think those of us who've been in this field for a long time sort of started to think about those foods maybe 10, 15 years ago as just being high calorie, high sodium, high sugar, and that was the problem. But there's something on a deeper level, I think, about how
Mhm,
these foods are made and structured that is having a significant effect on the gut microbiome.
mhm,
And I think as more and more research comes out into that, I think we're going to find out just how bad they can be for us.
mhm,
And you mentioned one thing that I sort of tag onto, and I talk to my patients about a lot, which is it's not just that they're not good for us, but they are designed to make you eat more of them.
mhm.
You
Yeah.
know, they make you crave these substances. They make you eat more of these substances. And, I think, I've seen a lot of patients who try things like Whole30 or, try to go very whole foods for a little
Mhm,
while. And so they're like, it took me about 2, 3 weeks,
mhm.
but I don't crave the things I used to snack on all the time anymore. So
Yeah.
there's something going on between the gut and the brain with these
Mhm,
foods that is really impacting the way people eat. And I think recognizing that with people, because I think a lot of us feel very guilty when we have
Mm-hmm.
cravings for these foods, right? And you and I have talked about this all the time. The idea of guilt associated with food is not helpful in any way. Shouldn't feel guilty about eating. Eating is sustenance. Eating is good for us. But, I think there's a lot of judgment that we put on
Yeah.
ourselves, or our patients put on themselves about the types of foods that they eat. And just giving them that sort of sense of, it's not just you. You're craving these for a reason.
Hmm. Hmm.
They're
Yeah.
designed to make you crave them.
Hmm. Yeah. It's
Think
not
of
your
it as
fault.
nicotine, you know?
Yeah.
In some
Yep.
ways, these are addictive substances. And so just
Hmm.
giving them that permission to say, okay, maybe if I work at this change, eventually you won't feel like this.
Hmm.
And it's
Hmm.
not just me. It's not that I have no control or things like that.
Yeah. Yeah. It's
Um,
definitely complex for sure.
yeah. And I have a lot of my patients who ask me about whether estrogen is going to help them
Mm.
to make better food choices, or is it going to change their gut microbiome? And I have to tell them that the honest answer is we don't know,
Yeah.
right? It's probably a complicated interrelationship between estrogen and nutrition and lifestyle, and how these things are already shifting and what happens to the breakdown products. Nobody's looked at this
Hmm.
in a way that we can make any definitive answer to that. I tell my patients, I'm certainly not going to start you on estrogen to affect your gut microbiome. I'm starting you for symptomatic reasons, or, if you have osteopenia and to support your bones. But I don't have any data that tells me I should be starting it in this arena.
Yeah.
So I just can't make a blanket statement.
Hmm.
And, I think we know that estrogen doesn't make you lose or gain weight with any particular frequency. It doesn't do all these things. I think oftentimes our patients are coming to us with outsized expectations for
Hmm.
what
Hmm.
hormone therapy can do for them.
Hmm.
And just resetting that expectation can be really helpful. And I think a lot of them come to us and ask us, I think both of us, about, sometimes they call it the estrobiome, sometimes they call it, the real name is the estrobolome. So you want to talk a little bit about that and how you explain it to patients and what that means? Because they're hearing about it, but they don't
Hmm.
really understand the implication.
Yeah, yes, again, thank you, social media, for sending all sorts of information, which usually is a nugget of truth. But then what gets transpired and then what the patients ask us in our clinic time with them can be
Right,
completely different.
right.
And so
True.
the what Rebecca was talking about, whether patients may refer to it as the estrobiome or the estrobolome, it's this interplay between the estrogen gut and then distal mucosal sites. So as Rebecca mentioned at the beginning, we know that the microbiome, the bacteria in the microbiome have byproducts which become chemical messengers in the body, which is really cool at a
Yeah,
scientific level. It's pretty
it
amazing.
is.
But the vaginal epithelium has estrogen receptors, as we all know, and so it's responding to some of these chemical messengers. But there's so much signaling, and there's so many things that could impact that. So I think,
Mhm.
if we do, certainly one, you could run the experiment. Hey, let's do the things that support your gut health, and let's see if you notice benefits in other areas of
Mhm.
whether it be your vaginal microbiome or your overall body, and see how someone feels. I think, one thing, as Rebecca was talking about, the impact of hormone therapy for those that it's appropriate for. I think the biggest impact I see with patients that are able to have this is that they just say, I feel a little bit more like myself. I feel a little bit better. So, guess
Mhm.
what happens when they can do that? They're willing to take the time to prep a salad versus to go out for fast food. They're
Right.
willing to take a time to go for a walk and get some fresh air. Like things that they're willing to add more fiber. Perhaps they're less stressed, so their digestion is feeling better. So
Actually, I
all of
think a
these
lot of
things,
it comes down to them sleeping better too.
yeah, the sleep is better. So then it's like,
Yeah.
chicken or the egg? Which
Yeah.
one is helping? It's difficult to know. Ultimately, we want to help the individual feel better, but it is really complex. And so I think there's a lot of potential that supporting the gut microbiome may have other benefits,
Hmm.
but because there's so many things, we don't know for sure yet. And so best case is let's focus on the things that we do know, whether they're even if they're not so sexy.
Yeah. So, sort of concluding thoughts from each of us. I'll go first. Estrogen is not a gut balancing hormone that we know of. Um, Menopausal hormone therapy can be incredibly beneficial for a lot of things. I think Stacy just said it the best with, it can really help you to feel better in ways that will allow you to do the things that might impact your microbiome, that might impact your digestion, all those things. But it's not the miracle cure for that. We should be using it for the symptoms that we know it has benefit on. How about you, Stacy? What are some closing, sort of concluding thoughts that everybody can take away?
So I think the things that we focus on, myself and the dietitian team here at
Hmm.
Genève, is always how can patients eat a wide variety of plants? It doesn't
Right.
mean you have to be vegan or vegetarian. You can still have animal products, but how can you increase the variety of plants that you have? And that includes everything from fruits and vegetables, but beans, legumes, grains. And sometimes it could be fun just to have a patient like count how many plants you get in your day and then make a goal to increase it by two or three. So you can keep it simple, but it can help keep that variety that increases the diversity. The more variety of things you eat introduces more diversity to the gut. Fermented foods, if
Oh,
patients are
yeah.
open to it, that is something that, and we do know, it's interesting. There are other cultures. Asian cultures use a lot of fermented foods that use more than we do in Western in our Western diet. But those can be added in, everything from kimchi, miso, sauerkraut. Kombucha is a source. I would say that if the store-bought ones don't have a ton of probiotics, but sometimes that can be an introduction. One that I really like, if patients are willing to try it, is kefir. And that is one that you can just have a couple ounces. You want something that has live active cultures in it. But I have a lot of patients that have digestion challenges, and we start with just 1 to 2 ounces of kefir per day. They're going to get other benefits from that as well. And that can sometimes be a nice, easy introduction to fermented foods and a dose of probiotics.
It's a good
Uh,
source of calcium too.
Exactly. So we got some bone bone health benefits there. And then moving your body, if you think about, back to our basic microbiology and that we know we all took at one point in our education, that there are anaerobic and there are aerobic bacteria. And so if you're moving your body, especially if you're moving at a higher intensity and getting to a point of breathlessness, you have less oxygen in your gut. And so you're changing that environment, which changes the makeup, which has also been shown to be beneficial
Mhm.
to improve that diversity. So, however, patients enjoy moving their body, helping them to do that consistently can benefit and can benefit digestion from a cholinergic effect as well
Yes.
as from the microbiome. If you can help, the other thing that can be helpful is experimenting with mindfulness around meals. So much of us are go, 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 totally get it. And it may not be that everyone's going to be able to have a mindful eating practice, but can they take a breath before they eat? Can they put their fork down between bites? This also can support digestion as well. And then, as we know, limiting the ultra processed foods where it's realistic and feasible, even decreasing by one per day, one per week. All of these things can add up over time that can be beneficial. So, those would be my takeaways. Certainly, we could talk about this for another
I
hour,
know.
but
I
that's
know we
a
can, but
thing
we
for
want to
sure.
allow plenty of time for people to ask us questions.
Mhm.
So I'm going to open it up for questions. You guys have access to the chat, so please put any questions in the chat that you have. And also this would be a great time if you don't have a question per se, but there's a topic you really want us to address in the future, if you want to throw that in the chat. If I don't see any questions, there was one other topic that we haven't really touched on, Stacy, though you brought it up before we started, which was, we were wondering if people were going to ask us about probiotic supplements.
That's a big one up there.
Um, yeah, and there's a lot of them out there. And so menopause combined with autoimmune issues. So that's a good one. We'll definitely have to think about how to address that because it definitely comes up. So let's talk a little bit about probiotic supplements just for a minute while other things come into the chat. So I kind of left it out on purpose because I really struggle with any supplements, right? Because again, any kind of supplement is a dietary aid. It is an unregulated thing. So we don't really know what's in the pills or capsules that people are buying, which is hard. So it makes it really hard to recommend anything. The other thing that I struggle with from like a gut bacteria perspective is, one of the things I know from the research we're seeing going on in the vaginal microbiome is that there are different normal microbiomes. Not everybody's is the same. So how do I tell someone to go buy a gut probiotic that may not be the right balance of bacteria for them? Everybody's just different. So it's really hard to recommend them. How do you talk to patients about them, Stacy?
Yeah, same thing of the just that reality of especially, and there's so many out there that are like,
Hmm.
this one's for you, or take this quiz and we'll give you your
Hmm.
specified the probiotic. Everybody's microbiome, just like Rebecca mentioned, the vaginal microbiome
Hmm.
is unique to us as our fingerprint. And so the idea that these probiotics are going to, one probiotic is going to help one person is going to be the same as the other is probably not realistic. I think if we look at the probiotic supplement takeoff, it paralleled the escalation in this microbiome research. When
Hmm.
someone heard like, oh, microbiome's getting more attention, here we go,
I
opportunistic
can sell you
thinking.
it.
Yes. But we're just not there yet. And so I think, a lot of patients, sometimes I see patients because it is out there that peri and postmenopausal women need a probiotic. So I see a lot of patients that come in on probiotics and I ask, how they're feeling. Some patients have digestive symptoms and I actually recommend let's experiment going off the probiotics. Sometimes they feel better. And so they're like, oh, great, I can save money. They're not cheap supplements. They're on this
No.
expensive side of things. Other patients find that it is helpful for them. And so we kind of go back the risks and benefits, pros and cons, recognizing that it's not regulated. There could
Hmm.
be some things in here that they don't know about, and then they get to choose. So that informed, decision making, and thinking about that. But yeah, it's kind of the Wild West out there with the probiotic
It is
supplements.
a little bit the Wild West. And the other thing that sort of came into my head as you were talking, which has then since flown out of my head because I am menopausal and that happens sometimes, um, oh, I was going to say the one area where we have a little bit of research about probiotic supplementation is after significant insult to the gut. So
Hmm.
after long-term antibiotic use,
Hmm.
or if you've had a serious gastrointestinal illness, then
Yeah.
sometimes it can help to kickstart the repopulation of the gut, and
Yeah.
that may have a benefit. But sort of chronic long-term use, you may be fighting with your natural gut bacteria at that
Hmm.
point. So
Yeah.
I think there's a role and then a not a role. We do have a question. Can estrogen therapy cause or worsen yeast issues? And I'm a gynecologist, so I'm going to take that to mean vaginal yeast issues. I'm not sure which yeast issues you're talking about. Um, no, not per research. Um, when we are using either systemic or vaginal estrogen, can it change the balance of what's going on in the vagina and reset sort of the bacterial profiles and things like that? Yeah, it's actually kind of why we use it. Um, I don't see it as causing yeast infections. I think yeast infections is just an overgrowth of yeast within a estrogenized or non-estrogenized vagina can happen to either. Um, I do always tell people if they're having sequential yeast infections, the two things that I think about are either that um, they could be pre-diabetic or diabetic, because the more sugar in your bloodstream, the more likely yeast is to grow. So I always look for that if I'm seeing someone over and over again for yeast infections. But I also have started to look for unusual yeast forms or azole resistant yeast because since diflucan or fluconazole has become basically over the counter, I mean, you still need a prescription, but just barely. Most people just call somebody and they throw it in at the pharmacy. We're seeing an increasing number of even Candida albicans that are azole resistant. And again, this happens whenever we don't steward our antimicrobials well. We start to get resistant bacteria or fungi in this case. But I don't think there's a direct link with estrogen and yeast infections. In fact, I think a lot of women misinterpret genital urinary syndrome of menopause as a yeast infection because it feels itchy and dry. So they may self-treat a few times and come in and say, "Hey, I've had like 3 yeast infections." I'm like, "Well, did you see somebody and actually get it diagnosed, or it just felt itchy and you treated it?" Because that also, and sometimes estrogen can help with that. And then the other thing I see, during the perimenopause and menopausal transition, we see an increase in autoimmune disorders of the vulva, like lichen sclerosis, which can feel a lot like a yeast infection to women. And many women I diagnose with that have either self-treated or been treated for multiple yeast infections before they come see me. So I don't know if it's a direct relationship with the estrogen, but these things are all happening at the same time, I guess is what I'm trying to say. All right. I don't see any other questions. I would love it if somebody has another question, but if not, and any other topics that people would like to see in the future. I'm going to take down that autoimmune issue one. That's a tough one because it
Oh,
definitely there is a spike. Oh,
Rebecca,
you say?
there's one I just saw I forgot in the Q&A part. So
Oh, I forgot
I
there's a
just
Q&A
saw
part. Let
the
me look there.
little, yeah, there's
All
one.
right. Hold on. Vaginal odor, but all tests negative um, around perimenopause, postmenopause. So yeah, vaginal odor is a tough one. As I like to tell people, your vagina is not meant to smell like a flower. It has an odor, and that odor will shift as we go through the menopausal transition because the bacteria will shift as you go through the menopausal transition. And I think some women really pick up on that and it becomes something that they can really perseverate on. It's not an infection, it's a difference, but it can be really, really, really hard for some people, especially if they come from a background where cleanliness is really emphasized and they feel unclean by this odor. I have actually counseled women that some of the hair removal that we do to the vulva may be contributing to that because you are changing the bacterial milieu by taking all that hair off. The hair traps natural oils and helps to balance the bacteria. So sometimes I've had to really talk women into maybe taking a break from complete hair removal for a little while and see if that doesn't make a difference as well. But yeah, I definitely have seen these people who just really feel like something fundamental has changed. And I tell them, in fact, it has probably. You probably have a different complement of bacteria there. There is no role for vaginal probiotics in this. The ones you take orally don't get to the vagina. The ones you put in vaginally are almost all of them on the market are actually rectal lactobacilli. They're not generally crispidus, or if they are crispidus, we don't know if it's really crispidus in there. It's just a matter of sort of coming to terms with the new vagina. Vaginal estrogen can help a little because that might bring them back to a different bacterial profile. And then I saw, okay, HRT and longevity and hives during perimenopause. Oh, you're killing me here. I got some tough topics for us to go on to, Stacy.
These
We
are
have
all
to
in your
think about how
court.
to address
So
these. All
yeah,
right.
but I guess these are topics for the future for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, no, these are all good topics for us to sort of look into and think about. I think the hives, we might not do a whole Menopause 201 on hives alone, but maybe we can do one on the more unusual symptoms of the menopause transition that we see. Because I've also had people ask me about things like vertigo and things like that. So might be an interesting one for a future one. All right, everybody. It was lovely chatting with you, Stacy. I always enjoy it.
Always enjoy talking with you, Rebecca. And thank you everybody for joining this evening, especially Monday
Yeah.
before Thanksgiving.
Yeah, and I hope, nobody feels bad about their Thanksgiving dinner. Food is good and family is good, and celebrating is good. So don't worry about how processed the foods are. Just enjoy. But
Yes, exactly.
maybe add an extra plant to your
Yes,
add an extra plant to your Thanksgiving plans, like Stacy
absolutely.
said.
All right.
Good
Well,
night,
take care,
everyone.
everyone. Thank you. Thanks, Rebecca.
Bye bye.